Welcome to the module on flow, which is something all writers can improve upon. Today we're going to talk about 4 different levels of flow. So first we have inter-sentence flow, which is how clauses and asides and fragments work together within one sentence. Then we have inter-sentence flow, which is how one sentence moves into the next. Third, we've got flow between paragraphs. So how you are gluing together paragraphs using topic sentences primarily. And finally, we have flow between sections. This isn't flow between chapters necessarily, but sections within a chapter. And the 2 most important levels of flow that we're going to be focusing on today are sentence flow and paragraph flow. These are 2 that most of us struggle with. Inter-sentence flow we covered to some degree in our sentence structure work, and section flow is not as critical, which we'll discuss at the end. But first we will go over inter-sentence flow briefly. So there's an acrostic that you all can remember as ways of joining together clauses. So when we have a compound sentence or a complex sentence, we're joining together at least one independent and possibly multiple dependent clauses. And there are a number of ways we can connect such clauses, as we've discussed in our sentence structure work. But one easy tool to remember this is fanboys, and this acrostic stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are all short transition words that you can use to connect clauses within sentences. A lot of us might find ourselves just relying on and but over and over again, but we have to remember that there are oftentimes more specific or nuanced relationships that some of these words can get across, as well as just varying our very basic vocabulary in our writing. Then there are also the conjunctive adverbs that we might use, such as however, though, therefore, thus. So this should be review for you, but just think about how you're connecting clauses to make it flow logically and smoothly for your reader. Another big way to enhance your flow within a sentence is by practicing parallel writing. So here we have an example of a sentence that does exhibit parallel writing. Great skiers know how to plant their poles, focus their gaze, and turn with their legs, not shoulders. So maybe pause the presentation, take a second to think about why this might exhibit parallelism. As we know, parallel means things that are aligned. So what do you see that is aligned in this list of 3 things that makes a skier great? The answer is that all 3 items in our list, plant their poles, focus their gaze, turn with their legs, have a verb, a present tense verb, plant, focus, and turn. So instead of mixing up our list here with perhaps compound nouns or different tenses of a verb, we're making sure that this is cleanly aligned, and this is an example of parallelism. So at its most basic form, parallelism means you're coordinating your clauses or your items in the list, you're aligning your subjects grammatically. Of course, the principle can also be applied more broadly in how you construct a paper, so exhibiting parallel section structure or parallel paragraph structure or sentences that sort of mimic the same type of structure that work for you. But we're focusing on the inter-sentence level here in terms of parallelism. So here are 2 opportunities to fix sentences that do not exhibit parallelism. The first, in Pakistan, industrial waste, sewage, and dumping used oils are the leading causes of freshwater pollution. So take a second to pause your presentation and try to rewrite this sentence with parallelism. And once you've resumed, what you might have done is instead of saying dumping used oils, which is a compound verb, you could say and oil waste, for example, or oil contamination. Or you could translate industrial waste and sewage into compound verbs to match dumping used oils. So you could say in Pakistan, the depositing of industrial waste, the flowing sewage streams, and dumping used oils are the leading causes of freshwater pollution. And as you can probably pick up, that's a little clunkier, more verbose, so compound nouns are usually the way to go. Here's another example. This product is vital to improve the health of the community and for restoring the environment. Take a second, pause the presentation, and try to rewrite that exhibiting parallelism. And now that you've resumed, what you might notice is that the 2 items in our list, improving the health of the community and restoring the environment, are not aligned because we have improve and then for restoring. So instead we might say this project is vital to improve the health of the environment and to restore the environment. Or we might say this product is vital for improving the health of the community and for restoring the environment. And then we would be exhibiting parallelism. So now we'll move on to how to make sentences flow from one to the next. And this is something many of us struggle with. The first thing I want to think about is given new. And this is sort of a contract that you have with your reader, whereby you're saying, with each subsequent sentence after the first sentence, I'm going to allude back to some information I already gave you and then add something new. And this helps your reader navigate your paper easily so that they're not constantly looking back to see what you're referring to or what the assumption is upon which the next sentence is based. And some of the ways we can refer back are by referring to an idea we previously mentioned as it or this. We might add a noun, just repeating what we said, for example, this phenomenon. We might recast the phenomenon that we're talking about in new terms, just so that our wording doesn't sound redundant. And then we want to use connecting words to build links between our sentences. So I'm going to show you an example. This is a passage that does not exhibit the given new contract. So take a minute to read it to yourself. I would try reading it out loud as well. And then take out a piece of paper and try to rewrite it, adding in given new information. So at the beginning of each sentence, after the first sentence, add in a phrase, a word, a clause that connects it to the previous sentence or makes it build upon the previous sentence. And you might find that it makes more sense to add that phrase in the middle of the sentence. So pause the presentation and do that. And now we'll resume and I'll show you an example of how you might fix this. So I've added in to the second sentence, in addition to communicating with their hands. So in addition, we're building upon what we just said, and communicating with their hands, we're rephrasing what we just said before we add something else about our orangutans here. Then in the next sentence, we decide not to add something at the beginning, but in the middle. So even recently begun. The word even implies that you're sort of outdoing yourself or outdoing what you previously said. They've even started to use Tinder to date in zoos. The next sentence, we add these communication patterns. So these is a word sort of like this or it. It's referring to something specific that we already went over. And then finally, the last sentence, we add this evidence of high orangutan IQ. This evidence of high orangutan IQ sort of recasts all of the sentences that precede it to make the larger point. So here we're really ushering the reader through the passage rather than abruptly moving from sentence to sentence on a topic. This is something I'm going to go over very briefly, but another thing is we just want to make sure our pronouns align between sentences and within sentences. This has a few errors here. Many politicians aren't the people they make himself out to be in ads. They have high rates of infidelity, and the public often discovers that his bank accounts are padded with handsome bribes. Take a minute to think about what is wrong with this little passage here. And what is wrong with it is that our subject is politicians, which is a plural term and includes possibly both males and females. So instead of he or himself, we need they, themselves, their. So especially when you're editing, if you change around your subject, you might forget to change the pronouns. Make sure these align. And then finally, just to give you another example of intersentence flow, we'll talk more broadly about transitions. These might incorporate given new, like with the orangutan passage, but we also might just use transition words more simply. So again, pause the presentation, read this passage, and try to add in some transitions to make it flow more logically. And here's an example of a few things we could do to fix it. So after the first sentence, we can add however, which is a transition word. This projection doesn't account for. So this is again exhibiting given new. We're referring back to the projection we just quoted. Then below, scientists say these ice sheets could melt. So these referring to what we just mentioned earlier. And then finally, at the end of the last sentence, we can just add consequently, the number of climate change refugees could reach nearly 1 billion. So just adding that simple word shows that the last sentence is an effect of the possibility of these ice sheets melting, which we talk about in the previous sentences. So I just have two writing exercises to try to reform short passages and add in transitions. Here's the first one, so pause the presentation and try to recast this using transition terms. You might combine a couple sentences, draw upon some of the punctuation lessons that we've had. You could make this one sentence, but just think about how you can make it flow better, make it less choppy. And I don't have a solution for you on this. This is just practice for you. And then once you finish this one, here's another rewrite exercise. So this is one sentence, but it's very just kind of goes on and on without any punctuation or asides or anything like that. Think about how you might break it up into 2 sentences or what you might add to make it flow better and be more digestible for your reader. And now we'll move on and just talk about the second 2 forms of flow. First are paragraphs. So we've talked about how the paragraph is sort of a mini essay. 1 paragraph, 1 idea, right? So each paragraph should have its own thesis that you more or less prove, and then you move on to the next one. And the beginning of each paragraph is a topic sentence. You can kind of think about this like a mini thesis. Then we've got some supporting sentences, examples, evidence, etc., and our concluding sentence. And the first and last sentences are where we can really try to create transitions between paragraphs, glue them together, in other words. So here again, the concept of given new comes in again. So how can we refer back to the paragraph prior, or just maybe the last sentence of the paragraph prior, and then convey to the reader what we're going to be discussing in the paragraph that follows, the new information. So I want you to think about your topic sentences and concluding sentences like glue, and how you can sort of take a little from what's above and then put in a little from what will follow. Here are a few examples of strong topic sentences for paragraphs. So the first, in spite of the many challenges I face, I have also identified a plethora of opportunities for my businesses. So the first clause here, in spite of the many challenges I face, probably refers to a paragraph above that discusses the challenges you face, right? And now you're declaring to the reader that now you're going to shift trajectories and start talking about opportunities. So this is great. You're flowing from challenges to opportunities and using transition words like in spite of and also. And another example. However, many leaders in the field of freshwater monitoring argue that drones are the most efficient technology available. So however, we've got a transition word right at the beginning. Perhaps before we talked about other ways of freshwater monitoring, and now we're sort of signaling to the reader that we're going to pivot and talk about drones in this following paragraph or perhaps paragraphs. Another example, while waste oil has many possible uses, converting it into biodiesel is the most cost-effective solution. So think about what we might have talked about in the paragraph before, perhaps other uses of waste oil, or maybe the problems with waste oil. And now we're showing the reader that we're going to move into a discussion of biodiesel and why it's cost-effective. So all of these have strong ties between a possible previous paragraph and a following paragraph using transition words. And the following form of flow is between sections. And this is not always necessary. If we use headers especially, it sort of cues to the reader that we're switching ideas or switching topics, although transitions are always acceptable, of course. And so I have a couple examples here. The first is between sections, despite the growing popularity of desalination, reservoir engineering remains a more affordable technology for Pakistan. So here you might assume that the section prior talked about desalination, and that below in this section we're going to move to reservoir engineering. And so this just kind of would help the reader cue that they're going to move to the discussion of a different technology. And then we have another example. In the previous section, I provided an overview of agricultural water consumption in the Sindh province today. Now I will discuss projections about the future of agriculture in this region under different future precipitation scenarios. So think about what's different between these 2 types of transition statements. The second uses first person, and it's also a lot more explicit. So we make comments like, in the previous section, now I will discuss. And that's totally okay to do, especially in academic writing. Clarity is really important, especially when you're discussing complex ideas like all of you will be. So think about how you might just really clearly say to the reader, okay, I discussed this, and now we're moving on to a discussion of that. That's very much acceptable. Either form is fine. That is it for our discussion of flow today. So you'll have a number of readings and exercises to help you put this into practice. And as you're revising, try to read out loud and think about whether you're using transitions effectively, whether it sounds choppy and you need to add in some transition words or some given new clauses preceding sentences. And as usual, you can always contact me with any questions that you have or in search of more examples.